Picture the most beautiful city in the world. I'm serious. Picture it exactly as you think it looks. Wide boulevards with pale stone buildings and iron balconies, and those tall windows that make every room look like it belongs in a novel someone important wrote. Gas lamps reflected in wet cobblestones. The dome of something significant visible from half a dozen directions at once. A river running through the middle that has been running through the middle long enough to constitute a permanent feature of the European imagination. Got it? Good. Now add 43 people to one building. Not a large building. A normal Paris building, 6 stories, stone facade with modest balconies on the second and third floors only. The kind that photographs beautifully from across a street and reveals nothing about its interior. Squeeze 2 families onto each floor, 3 onto some. More where the rooms divided and subdivided over decades of landlords extracting maximum rent from minimum space. Stack them vertically like a diagram in one of those concerned pamphlets that educated people in the 1880s liked to write about the living conditions of people who couldn't afford to read pamphlets. Add 1 toilet per 2 floors, shared by 14 people. Add 1 water pump in a courtyard approximately the size of a generous dining room, serving all 43. Add walls thin enough that when the man in the room beside you drops something at 2 in the morning, you don't just hear the impact, you hear which part of the room he was in when it fell. You hear what he says afterward. You know, from the quality of what he says, whether he dropped it by accident or threw it on purpose. Add a zinc roof that turns rain into percussion, and summer into an experiment in convective heating, and winter into something that produces ice on the inside of your only window. Add a smell that layers. Coal smoke first, because it's everywhere in the city and settles into everything. Below that, whatever 43 people are cooking simultaneously, the deep permanent smell of cabbage broth and rendered fat that no amount of airing will shift from the stairwell. Below that, the specific institutional smell of the shared toilet at the end of the corridor, which is cleaned occasionally but not often enough for the word occasionally to carry much comfort. And below that, underneath all of it, the baseline smell of human habitation conducted at very close quarters, which is to say the smell of people, which is to say you. That's Paris. Not the Paris that sells itself, the Paris that houses 2/3 of its own population in the buildings behind the boulevards, while the boulevards go on looking magnificent and someone in an 8th arrondissement apartment writes a pamphlet about conditions they find troubling. We're going back tonight, not as tourists watching the Impressionists paint or the engineers build their iron tower. We're on the 6th floor of 14 Rue de Boulanger, 5th arrondissement, Paris, in the year 1888. We have a candle, a straw mattress, and a wall through which we can hear everything. I make these history stories for sleep, and at this point I'm genuinely unsure whether you're the kind of person who falls asleep to the ambient sounds of Parisian tenement life, or whether you're lying fully awake in the dark, listening to every detail because there's something about other people's historical discomfort that makes your own present circumstances feel more manageable. Honestly, either motivation is valid, subscribe if you haven't, get comfortable, here we go. The wall is talking, not metaphorically. The wall, the plaster wall on the left side of your room, the wall that separates room 6B from room 6C of 14 Rue de Boulanger, is transmitting sound the way a very poor concert hall transmits music, which is to say with minimal selectivity and no respect for the preferences of the audience. Everything comes through. The argument that started somewhere around 11:30, the weeping that followed it, less angry, more exhausted. The small daughter's voice, which has the particular pitch of a child who has been woken from sleep into something she doesn't have the words for yet, high and thread-like and continuous. And beneath all of that, from the room directly above you, from the ceiling, or more precisely from the 20 centimetres of wooden joists and plaster that constitute the ceiling, the cough. Old Monsieur Thibault's cough, which you have heard every night for 11 months, and which you have learned to read the way you might learn to read weather. The long cough of November, productive and alarming, but somehow vigorous. The cough of a body still fighting. The shorter December cough, frequent but rhythmic, almost metronomic. The February cough, quieter now, with longer pauses between bouts. The silences somehow worse than the sounds. You know what those silences mean. You've been trying not to know for 3 weeks, but you do. It is 20 minutes to 4 in the morning. You have been not sleeping since 1:30. This is Tuesday, the 14th of February, in the year 1888. You are Lucien Moreau, 22 years old, compositor by trade, native of Clermont-Ferrand in the Auvergne, resident of this room for 11 months. You have a composing stick hanging on a nail above the table, 3 letters from your mother on the shelf beside your tobacco, and approximately 90 minutes before you need to be at the water pump ahead of the morning rush. You stare at the ceiling. The ceiling is plaster, painted at some point in the last decade with a whitewash that has since developed the texture of something geological, fissured and mapped with dark lines of damp running in from the corner where the zinc roof meets the exterior wall. In certain lights, candlelight especially, it looks like a map of a river delta. You have spent enough time staring at it to have traced the main channels and several tributaries. The cough goes through its phases above you. Starts, builds, subsides. The long pause, too long, where you find yourself holding your breath without choosing to. Then it starts again. From the left wall, Colette Pellerin's voice, lower now, speaking carefully in the register she uses when Maurice is drunk enough that the wrong tone is the thing that tips the evening from argument into something worse. You've learned her vocal registers the way you've learned the building's sounds. Involuntarily, completely, over time. The voice she uses with her daughter, soft and explanatory. The voice she uses with neighbours, formal and correct, a small performance of ordinariness. The voice she uses with Maurice when she's angry. The voice she uses with Maurice when she's afraid. You know all of them. You've never mentioned this to her, or to anyone. That's the arrangement. That's the deal everyone in this building maintains simultaneously and silently. We know everything about each other and we acknowledge nothing. Maurice says something low and indistinct. The timbre of a man who has been drinking since before supper and whose relationship with coherence is at this point aspirational. The daughter cries, stops, cries again. You turn onto your side. The straw mattress shifts under you, rustling, a sound that in an otherwise silent room would be significant, but in this room is lost underneath everything else. You pull the thin blanket up, which helps somewhat. Your coat is on the chair. You've been putting the coat over the blanket on cold nights, coat and blanket together, which gives you roughly the warmth of a single adequate blanket. The room is 4 degrees Celsius. You've estimated this from your breath, which shows clearly in the dark. Not the violent condensation of genuinely cold spaces, but the light, lazy clouds of a room that is uncomfortable rather than dangerous. Merely uncomfortable. The distinction matters. You've learned which distinctions matter here. 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. You measured in the second week because you needed to understand the dimensions of what you'd committed to. You measured with your arm span and confirmed with the composition rule you brought home from the shop, a long wooden measuring stick, and arrived at approximately 1.8 metres by 2.4. You've since encountered people who live in smaller spaces and people who've made more of smaller spaces, and both kinds of people make you feel something different. The ones who live smaller remind you of the margins available for things to get worse. The ones who have made more of it remind you of the work you haven't yet done. The shelf holds tobacco in a clay jar, the 3 letters in their envelopes, a stub of candle, a borrowed copy of Le Capitaine Fracasse. Gautier, adventure story set in the 17th century, swashbuckling and theatrical, currently missing its cover. On the table, another candle, larger, the table itself being too small to hold much else. On the nail above the table, the composing stick, your main professional tool, a small metal frame that holds type as you build each line. It weighs perhaps 300 grams. By the end of a 10-hour shift, you feel each of those 300 grams in specific tendons along your right forearm. Maurice Pellerin stops talking. The daughter's crying winds down in the way children's crying winds down when the adults around them finally go silent. Decrementally, the peaks getting shorter, the silences getting longer, the body recalibrating to the changed atmosphere. Thibault coughs, pauses, coughs again. At some point, you don't know when, because your sense of time in the dark is unreliable. Your eyes close and stay closed, and you stop being aware of the sounds, which means you sleep, at least partially, in the patchwork way of the building's nights. Not the unbroken sleep of your village childhood, when the house was large enough that your parents' sounds were background rather than foreground, and the only noise at 4 a.m. was an occasional dog on the road outside. Sleep like this, intervals, fragments, the consciousness coming back briefly at each new sound, and then releasing again, the body taking what it can in the gaps. When the church bell on the Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève strikes 5, you're already half awake. When it strikes the quarter hour, you give up. The floor is cold in the specific way of a floor that no one has walked on since yesterday evening, that has had the full night to radiate whatever warmth it held back into the inadequate air of the room. Not wet cold, not stone cold, wooden cold, which has its own character. You sit on the edge of the mattress and feel it through the thin soles of your feet for 1 second before sliding into your boots, which you left beside the bed last night, still slightly damp from yesterday's rain, and are now merely stiff, the leather contracted in the cold. You don't bother with laces. The toilet is at the end of the corridor. The corridor is approximately 4 feet wide, which is narrow enough to make it a trench in the darkness between 7 closed doors, and at 5 a.m. its smells are at their most concentrated. The overnight accumulation of everything the building's 43 residents have exhaled and discarded during sleeping hours. Coal smoke from the stove at the corridor's far end, the layered biological smell of bodies in closed rooms, and the toilet, whose particular quality you will simply describe as present and leave it at that. The toilet has a wooden seat over a shaft that connects to the city's cesspool system. The shaft is served by the vidangeurs, the night soil men who come at intervals to drain it. But the interval has been, lately, optimistic. You spend the minimum possible time inside it. This is not difficult to accomplish. Fernand Ducrot is in the corridor when you emerge. Fernand is 51. He works as a dyer at a textile workshop on the Ile Saint-Louis, which is why his hands are permanently a particular shade of blue-green. He has a wife and 2 grown children somewhere in Normandy, and a room on the opposite side of the corridor, and the specific aura of a man who has been doing the same job in the same city for long enough that his job and his city have become physically part of him. The dye in his skin being perhaps the most literal possible expression of this. He looks at you. You look at him. He nods. You nod. This is the sum total of your Tuesday morning greeting. It constitutes, by sixth floor standards, warmth. The stairwell is dark. 6 flights of stairs, stone treads worn concave at their centres by decades of descent. A single gas bracket on each landing that is not lit at this hour. It's lit from dusk to roughly midnight, when Madame Vidal, who controls such things, turns it off. In the dark you go by feel and memory, your right hand trailing the iron railing, your body carrying the particular automatic knowledge of staircases you've used enough times that your feet know the intervals without your attention. The passage at the ground floor. The narrow tunnel that runs between the street entrance and the courtyard, approximately 3 meters long, with Madame Vidal's window on the right side. Madame Vidal's window, as always, tells you nothing about whether or not Madame Vidal is asleep. The curtain is closed. The curtain is always closed. In 11 months, you have never passed this window without the sensation of being noted. Whether this sensation is accurate or a product of your own psychology, you have not determined. You're not sure the distinction matters. The effect is the same. The courtyard. In February at 5 in the morning, the courtyard of 14 Rue des Boulangers is a rectangle of grey. The building walls rise around it on 4 sides. 4 stories of windows, dark at this hour. Above the ground floor, the windows like closed eyes, the stone face of the building's interior self. The sky above, visible as a quadrilateral perhaps 4 meters across, is the particular grey of Paris winter before dawn, which is not the sharp dark grey of genuine night, but the soft ambient grey of a city whose 1,000 gas lamps are still burning and whose coal fires have been generating smoke since before the last stars were visible. The pump stands in the centre. It's an iron pump, surface rusted along the seams to a brownish orange that darkens the iron to near black at the joints, with a long handle worn smooth at the grip by 10,000 hands over however many years it's been in this courtyard. The water comes from the Seine, filtered through the city's sandbed system, delivered by pipe. It is cold. In February it's so cold coming out of the spout that you can feel the temperature differential in the air before your hands touch the stream. You're not the first person at the pump. Celeste Martin from the first floor is already there. Celeste Martin is 34, wife of a junior clerk at the prefecture, and she lives in the first floor room on the south side, the one that gets the most direct afternoon light, for which she pays substantially more than you pay for 6B, and for which she receives substantially more natural warmth, and a window that looks into the courtyard rather than up through zinc at a small rectangle of sky. Her husband leaves for the prefecture at 7:30. She has a child, 4 years old, who wakes at 6. She is therefore reliably at the pump between 5:15 and 5:30, extracting the water she needs for her morning and her child's morning before the full weight of the building's demand makes the pump a site of negotiation. She is, functionally, the highest status resident on this side of the building, not because she has declared this, not because anyone has agreed to it aloud, but because the logic of the building makes it so. First floor, best light, husband employed by the government, clean hands, always. She wears her hair already dressed at 5 in the morning, which requires either exceptional discipline or the vanity of someone who understands that in a 43-person building, how you appear at the pump matters. She glances at you as you enter the courtyard. Moreau. Madame Martin. This is, as morning exchanges go here, almost extravagant. Most mornings you get the nod. The word is a promotion. She works the pump handle with the focused efficiency of someone whose 20 minutes is already allocated. The handle requires some force in the cold. The mechanism stiffens when the temperature drops enough, and this morning it drops enough. She pumps with her right arm and her left balances the bucket beneath the spout, adjusting its angle slightly as the level rises. You set your own bucket down and wait. The courtyard is quiet except for the pump. Above, through the building's windows, the ordinary muffled sounds of early rising. Something scraping against a floor somewhere. A child's voice, brief. The smell of the first coal fires being lit drifts down. A thin, particular acridness. Coal igniting. Not yet the thick smoke of a hot stove, but the preliminary sharpness of something finding its temperature. Celeste lifts her full bucket, nods at the pump with the proprietary gesture of someone passing on access, rather than relinquishing control, and goes back through the passage. You take the handle. Cold. Even through your coat sleeve, cold enough to register immediately in your palm as a specific sensation. Not painful yet, but present. The kind of cold that starts as awareness and progresses steadily towards something else if you hold it long enough. You pump. The mechanism resists for the first 2 strokes. The handle moving through an arc that feels mechanical in the wrong way, like something not quite aligned, and then it catches, and the water comes. It emerges from the spout in a thick stream that steams faintly where it meets the colder air. You watch it fill the bucket in stages. The sound of it, water on metal, is the sound this courtyard makes every morning at this hour, has made every morning at this hour for however long this pump has stood here, has made for every hand that has gripped this same smooth handle. You think, how many hands? You think, how many mornings exactly like this one? This same grey light, this same cold iron. You don't let yourself follow that thought too far because it leads to a kind of vertigo you don't need at 5 a.m. before work. The bucket is 3/4 full. You stop there. Full is 52 steps up a staircase with a bucket that sloshes, and the difference between 3/4 and full is the difference between arriving at your room with what you intended to carry and arriving with what gravity decided to keep. You've calibrated this. You lift it. Up through the passage. Up the dark stairwell. Right hand on the rail. Left hand wrapped around the bucket handle. The water shifts with each step, a contained surge back and forth. The whole thing resisting you in the soft and constant way of things, filled with liquid and carried at an angle. Past the first floor landing, warmth from under Celeste Martin's door already, someone awake and someone stove lit. Past the second floor, where the painter lives. He keeps late hours, no light, no sound. Past the third, where the smell is farmyard and the Bazin children begin waking around 6. Past the fourth, past the 5th, Thibault's floor. You stop at the 5th floor landing for a moment. Thibault's door is the second on the left. There is no sound from it at this moment. The silence from behind it is not the silence of sleep. You have learned the difference. Sleep silence is warm somehow, has a quality of occupancy. This silence is flat, a held breath. A room where someone is awake and not moving, which is a specific state, a specific silence, the silence of someone who has learned not to move, because movement costs something they no longer have in surplus. You stand there for 3 seconds, 4, then you carry your bucket up the final flight, your room. You push the door with your shoulder, set the bucket down on the floor, and stand for a moment with your hands hanging at your sides, feeling the weight leave them. The absence of the bucket's weight is a specific pleasure, small but real, the way the removal of any sustained discomfort becomes pleasure when it stops. You wash your face. This is the part of the morning that cannot be extended, cannot be made comfortable, can only be gotten through. You cup water in both hands and bring it to your face, and the cold is complete and total. Not unpleasant, but total. A reset. Everything that was foggy and 3/4 asleep wiped out in approximately 3 seconds. You gasp. You do this every morning. You will always gasp. The gap between knowing the cold is coming and actually experiencing the cold is apparently unbridgeable by anticipation. The cold is always cold. You dry your face on the rough cloth hanging on the nail. The cloth smells of itself, which is the smell of a cloth that is washed once a week in water that you carried up 6 flights. It smells clean enough. You dress. Getting dressed in 6 square meters requires a choreography you've internalized so completely that you do it without thinking. Shirt first, sitting on the bed, arms through while still seated to avoid elbowing the wall. Trousers standing, back against the plaster to use the full width. Braces, waistcoat. There's a button missing on the left side, has been missing for 3 months. You keep the thread and the button in your coat pocket as a future intention. Jacket. This jacket is the jacket of a man who needs to look employed without looking like he earns more than he earns, which is a narrower aesthetic zone than it sounds. Not shabby. Shabby gets you treated as shabby by the foreman, and the foreman's opinion of you is a material concern. Not good either. Good takes money and signals ambitions that can be held against you. This jacket occupies the available space between those 2 failure modes. Your cap. Your scarf wound twice around your neck because it is February, and because the petit pont you will cross twice today is exposed to the river wind in a way that no scarf fully resolves, but that a scarf at least enters into negotiation with. You look at yourself in the piece of broken mirror glass propped on the shelf, 8 inches across, the reflection partial, head and one shoulder, and make the morning's assessment. Your hands are black, not dirty. Black. Compositors, black. The printer's ink that works into the skin along the knuckles and beneath the nails and in the tiny fissures of the fingertip calluses. Ink that the white spirit solution you use at the shop every evening reduces to a permanent grey rather than eliminating. You scrub. You use the brush. You have tried vinegar, and you have tried various preparations recommended by other compositors. The grey recedes somewhat. The black does not leave. In the print shop, everyone's hands are like yours. Here in the building, you are marked. Celeste Martin at the pump has hands that are clean. Fernand Ducros's hands are blue-green from the dye. Yours are black from the type. The painter on the second floor has paint-stained hands, but his stains are in colours. Ochre and viridian and the deep rust of vermilion, which makes them artistically defensible in a way that straightforward black is not. You pick up the bread from the shelf. Half a loaf, bought last night, hard by morning in the cold, but still bread, still nutritionally bread, still the thing that stands between you and getting to the print shop hungry, which is a state that makes the morning shift long in a different way than it would otherwise be. You eat it standing by the table, looking at the wall that separates you from the now quiet Pellerin room, chewing methodically. Maurice's argument spent itself somewhere in the small hours. The daughter has been asleep for at least 90 minutes by the sounds of things, which means Colette has also probably finally slept. You think, 12 francs a month. That's what 6C costs. You know this from a conversation Fernand had in the corridor 2 months ago. Fernand and one of the fourth-floor men, the kind of quiet number exchange that happens in corridors, information about the landlord, about the rent agent's habits, about what Madame Vidal does and doesn't report. 12 francs for a room approximately the same size as yours. Maurice earns, when he's working, about 40 to 50 francs a month. When he's not working, which is variable, Maurice's employment being the kind of employment that comes and goes with the season and the project, he earns whatever Colette earns taking in laundry, which is less. The arithmetic of 6C is not comfortable arithmetic. You finish your bread, you put your coat on, you open the door. The stairwell again, going down this time with the lighter steps of someone not carrying water. The building fully awake now in the way it's awake by 6. Doors opening and closing on various floors. The smell of coal fires from the stoves on the landings building toward the full morning density that will last until mid-afternoon, when it dissipates to merely pervasive rather than immediate. On the second floor landing a door opens as you pass, and the painter, his name is Laurent, you've established this from Fernand, comes out with the distracted, slightly surprised air of a man for whom mourning is a recent innovation. He glances at you. His hands today are white and pale brown, and he smells of linseed oil. Morning, he says. Morning. He goes upstairs. You go down. This is the extent of your relationship with Laurent, the painter of the second floor, except that you've heard him play violin for 3 months and know which scales he's working on, and that he sings to himself in a light baritone when he thinks the building is empty, which it never is. The passage, Madame Vidal's window still curtained, still noting, the street, Rue des Boulangers in February at 6 in the morning, and this is why you stay. This is the thing that was missing from the pamphlets about tenement conditions, from the concerned articles in the papers about the housing question and the surpopulation and the desperate state of Paris's working poor. All of that is true. All of it is real. And also, this. The street is already alive. Not the cafes. Those are opening, the first shutters being pulled back, the first chairs scraped onto the pavement, but the street itself, the delivery carts that arrive before the shops do, the men unloading from them in the brisk, authoritative way of people for whom this particular repetitive motion is so practiced, it's almost elegant. The concierge of the building across the street, already sweeping the pavement with the wide, flat-headed broom that makes the sound of bristles on wet stone, a sound you've come to associate with the precise hour of 6 in the morning more reliably than any clock. The woman who sells roasted chestnuts from a corner brazier near the Rue de la Montagne, she's not there yet. It's too early for chestnuts, but the corner is already occupied by a newspaper bundle, delivery fresh from the press, tied with string, waiting to be collected. The air is cold and it has been raining in the night, and the cobblestones are wet, and the smell of the city in the morning, which you know now the way you know the building sounds, which is to say completely and involuntarily, is at its best just now, before the traffic builds and the horses arrive in numbers, and the accumulated evidence of a city of 2 million people and their animals becomes the dominant sensory fact. Just now, at 6, there's the cold air and the wet stone and the wood smoke and a faint mineral smell that might be the river, and it's clean, or clean enough, which is what clean means in this context. You walk quickly, not running. Running would suggest panic. Running would mark you as someone to watch. Running would mean arriving at the print shop sweating, but quickly, the pace of someone who knows where they're going and is going there with intention. Past the wine merchant, shuttered, past the boulangerie on the corner of Rue Mouffetard, not shuttered, not even close to shuttered. The smell of fresh bread so intense at this corner that you turn toward it, involuntarily the way a plant turns toward light. The baguettes already visible through the window, pale gold in the lamplight. You can't afford to stop. Well, you can. The boulangerie sells bread for 5 centimes a loaf, but you've already eaten your morning bread, and the budget for today is settled, and buying bread when you've already eaten bread is the kind of calculation error that doesn't seem significant in the moment and accumulates into significance over a month. You keep walking. The Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève, which runs north toward the Seine, is busier. The morning crowd, that particular density of working Paris at 6, the workers and the market people and the delivery men and the women who were already up an hour before any of them, all of it building toward the full morning chaos that will peak around 8 and then settle into the ordinary daytime density. That is what most people mean when they say Paris is busy. Someone bumps your shoulder without acknowledging it. A man with a sack moving faster than you, intent on wherever he's going. This happens. You don't take it personally. In a city where most streets don't have raised pavements, the luxury of footpaths exists on the grander boulevards and nowhere else in most of the Fifth. All of you share the road with the horses and carts and carriages and each other, and the operating principle of Parisian street movement, as you've come to understand it, is that everyone is going somewhere urgent, and the social contract is that urgency is acknowledged but contact is not. The Petit Pont. You see Notre Dame before you reach the bridge. You always see it before you reach the bridge. The towers are high enough to be visible from several streets back, the upper portions of them appearing above the roof lines of the buildings along the quay, grey-brown stone against the paler grey of the February sky. The familiar asymmetry of them that you've been told isn't really a symmetry at all, but that always looks like it to you, like something that started as a plan and became something slightly else over the 3 centuries of its construction. The bridge itself, exposed to the river and the wind from both directions, the Seine running fast below, grey-green water moving with the purposeful speed of a river in February that has been gathering momentum from somewhere north and west for days and is now moving through the city with its agenda intact and nothing you're doing on the bridge concerning it in the slightest. The wind finds the gap between your scarf and your collar immediately, without even needing to search for it. You tighten the scarf with one hand and keep moving. Below, a barge is making its way upstream, moving slowly against the current, low in the water with its cargo. A man is standing at the rear with a long pole. 2 figures on deck doing something with ropes. The whole thing has the quiet, concentrated efficiency of work happening in cold water at 6 in the morning, which is the specific aesthetic of winter river work, and there's something about watching it from the bridge, watching the effort happening below you, the scale of it, the barge and its cargo and its crew all moving through the same February morning at the pace of the river rather than the pace of the street. That slows you down for 3 seconds. You can't afford 3 seconds. You cross the bridge, turn right along the quay, and duck into the narrow streets of the Ile de la Cité. The print shop is on a small street off the Rue de la Cité, between a bookseller who opens at 9 and a wine merchant who has already been open for 45 minutes, which tells you everything you need to know about the relative priorities of the Ile de la Cité. The sign above the door says Imprimerie Girard in paint, faded enough that the letters have acquired the soft edges of age, which for a print shop is either ironic or fitting. Below that, smaller, journaux, affiches, travaux de ville, newspapers, posters, commercial work. The door is unlocked. The shop is warm. This is the thing you're always grateful for and never say aloud. The shop is warm. The composing room must be warm because the type moves badly in the cold, because the hand that holds the composing stick must be functional, and in February a hand that is not warm enough is not fully functional. The stove at the back of the composing room has been burning since before you arrived. It burns continuously from the first arrival to the last departure, and in February the gap between these two events is small enough that it is essentially never entirely cold. After the zinc roof, after the corridor, after the courtyard pump and the wet cobblestones and the petit pont wind, the warmth of the shop is something physical. You stand in the doorway for perhaps 3 seconds longer than you need to. Moreau, the door. Bertrand. Bertrand is 53 years old and has been setting type in this shop for 23 years, since the year the Commune ended and the Third Republic began, since before you were born. He is a compact man with the specific physique of a compositor. Strong forearms, straight back, the slight right side lean of someone who has spent 2 decades favouring one arm in repetitive work. And he has views on most things, including doors and their relationship to frames, the current state of French typography, the decline in standards among recently trained compositors, and the weather, which he regards with personal suspicion. You close the door. The composing room, long and lit from the high windows on the north wall, lit additionally by 2 gas lamps, the lamps turned down to their minimum at this hour but present. The smell that is the specific smell of this room, the smell that has become the smell of your working hours, lead type, which has a metallic dryness in the nose, linseed oil from the inking process, the particular acrid chemical smell of the rollers, paper, which has a dust in it that settles in the back of your throat over the course of a day, and underneath all of it, something that might be the smell of words being made physical, if you're the kind of person who thinks about smells that way, which you are slightly. The type cases are arranged on their stands in front of 6 positions. Each case is a wooden drawer divided into individual cells, upper half for majuscules, lower half for minuscules, the distribution of cells determined by the frequency of each letter in French. E gets a large central cell, the most accessible, because in French text you reach for ES more than any other letter. Your position is the 3rd from the left. You've been at this position long enough that you could reach for the E cell in the dark, have in fact done so in the low-light conditions of winter mornings when the north window light is insufficient, and one of the gas lamps has gone out. You take your composing stick from the hook. Cold from overnight, a rectangular metal frame approximately 15 centimetres long, with an adjustable end that you set to the desired line width. You wrap your hand around it and feel the familiar weight, the specific gravity of your main tool, the heft of it in your palm. Setting type is a process the body learns before the mind does, and then the mind follows, and then the mind withdraws and lets the body continue without supervision. Left hand holds the stick cupped slightly, thumb against the back plate. Right hand moves across the case in a pattern that is not search but retrieval. Each cell is in a known position, each letter findable without looking. You reach for L and your hand goes to the right side, 4th row second from the left. You reach for EG and your hand goes to the centre mass, 1st row, without deviation. You reach for S and your hand. The motion is continuous. Click. The type goes in with a tiny metallic tap. Bottom edge meeting the bottom of the stick, right edge meeting the previous type. Click. Click. The line builds letter by letter, a physical sentence accumulating in your hand, heavy by the end of the line with the density of all those lead characters, each one perhaps a gram, 15 characters per line, 15 grams. You pick up and set down. You sort. You compose. The article today is a report on parliamentary proceedings. The current session of the Chamber of Deputies, covering a debate on tariff legislation, 12 column inches of dense political text that arrived last night in the handwriting of a journalist who was clearly writing under deadline pressure, his letters getting smaller and more compressed as the manuscript progressed. The final paragraphs a compressed scrawl that requires you to read them 2 or 3 times to be certain of each word before setting it. Parliamentary French is full of proper names that are traps. Transpose 2 letters in a deputy's name, and you've potentially changed the political meaning of a sentence. Bertrand has opinions about this. Bertrand has shown you the correction records from before your time, the complaints from politicians about being misquoted by typographical error, the cold formal letters from the editor passed down to the composing room, the compositing room's formal acknowledgements and apologies. These complaints have the specific character of people who work in text and feel the power of individual letters in a way that most people who read words as wholes don't fully experience. You read, you set. LESDPUTESDELAGAUCHE. Each letter a small lead block, a rectangle with a raised surface in the shape of a letter at one end, assembled in the stick to form words, assembled in the galley to form lines, assembled in the chase to form pages, impressed onto paper by the press to form the newspaper that will be in the hands of readers by 7 this evening, and wrapping fish by Thursday. This is what you make. At 8:30, the morning light has improved enough to work without the gas lamps. You reach up with your left hand and turn the nearest lamp's key without looking, reducing it to pilot, continuing the composition with your right. Bertrand makes his morning circuit of the cases, examining the previous day's galleys for corrections needed before today's run. He stops at your position. He picks up the galley of yesterday's agricultural prices column, runs his eye down it, sets it down. He picks it up again. He points to a figure in the 3rd paragraph. Wheat, he says, price per hectolitre. You look. The figure reads 37 francs 20 centimes. The manuscript has 37 francs 22 centimes. The difference is 2 centimes per hectolitre. The difference, across the hundreds of transactions that agricultural buyers make based on published price data, is the difference between accurate information and misinformation that changes commercial decisions. I'll correct it, you say. Before the galley goes to press, he sets it back. How long have you been at the case? 1 year and 9 months, including my time in Claremont. Claremont? He says this in the tone a man uses when confronted with a fact he's not going to argue with, but which explains something he's been working out for a while. He goes back to his circuit. You correct the figure. You redistribute the wrong type to its cells. 2 centimes, each letter going back individually. E to the E cell, C to the C cell, and set the correct version. The press in the back room starts. The floor vibrates slightly. The sound of the press is a sound that becomes the background of the whole day once it starts. A rhythmic mechanical heartbeat that you feel in the floor through the soles of your boots as much as you hear it. Other compositors arrive. Arnaud, youngest, from Brittany, 17 years old, who takes the case to your right with the slightly overcorrected competence of someone still performing capability rather than possessing it. Vaillant, who is 35 and says almost nothing all day except occasionally and specifically. Madame Bertrand, not Bertrand's wife, just a person who shares the name. A woman of 40 who is the only female compositor in the shop and who can set type at a speed that makes you slightly ashamed of your own pace when you watch her. There are 6 compositors in this shop. You know each of them the way you know the sixth floor corridor, by their working sounds, their habits, the small territorial understandings of shared space. Arnaud works fast and makes errors. Vaillant works at a pace that would appear unhurried to an outside observer and produces clean galleys with a consistency that Bertrand references as a standard. Madame Bertrand is fast and clean in a way that does not invite reference or discussion. The other two, Pépin and Faure, both in their 40s, work at the pace of men who have been doing this long enough that the work has become the pace. You work. The morning passes in the way the morning passes when the work is absorbing without being interesting, which is most mornings. Your right hand crosses the case, your left hand holds the accumulating line. The composing stick grows heavy, and you transfer the line to the galley and start again. The parliamentary text yields its complexities letter by letter. Somewhere around 11, the article changes register, and you realise you're reading as you set, actually following the debate rather than simply translating it to lead. There's a deputy named Castagnol who is apparently making a point about the relationship between tariff structures and rural employment, and Castagnol is making it in the particular way of a politician who has thought carefully about his argument and is expressing it in language that is precise enough to be set accurately and complex enough to require that you understand it before you can set it correctly. You understand it. You have opinions about it, actually, which you keep in the composing stick where they don't belong. At noon, Bertrand signals the hour. You stop midline. You set your stick on the corner of the case. Arnaud watches where you put it, not obviously but visibly, and you're aware of this, and wash your hands in the basin in the back, the white spirit solution doing its partial work, and you go out into the noon. The noon. Paris at noon in February. Pale light that has been doing its best for several hours and is not getting better. The sun somewhere above the cloud cover performing its civic duty without warmth. The streets of the Ile de la Cité are busy with the midday movement of a working neighbourhood. The people who work in the courts and the churches and the administrative buildings and the print shops and the wine merchants and the booksellers all released simultaneously into the streets to eat something before the afternoon. You cross back to the left bank, not by the Petit Pont, by the Pont au Double, which deposits you at the Pavis of Notre Dame, where a woman is selling poireaux from a cart and a dog is investigating something under the cart with the focused attention of a dog that has found something. You cut through the Rue Lagrange, past the baths that you use on Saturdays, past the entrance to the Jardin des Plantes where someone is pushing a wheelbarrow through the gates, along the Rue des Boulangers, your own street, your own building's facade, stone and modesty and nothing visible from outside about what happens inside, and then continue up toward the Rue Mouffetard. There is a woman named Josephine who has sold onion soup from a stall at the same corner here since before Haussmann redesigned half the neighbourhood. She's perhaps 70, perhaps older, with hands that have stirred soup pots for long enough to have developed a characteristic motion, a slow, circular stirring that happens even when she's not stirring anything, a phantom labour. Her soup costs 15 centimes for a bowl with bread included, and it is the best thing available to you within the constraints of your noon budget. It is also simply good soup, not good for 15 centimes soup, good soup made with stock that has been going since yesterday, and onions cooked slowly enough to become something sweeter and more complex than onions, with the bread raft on top gone slightly soft at the edges from proximity to the liquid. You eat it standing at the counter, bowl held in both hands, the warmth of the ceramic going into your palms where the cold of the composing stick has been for the last 4 hours. The soup steams. you let it. Standing at Josephine's counter with your hands wrapped around the bowl, you look southwest. Between two buildings there is a gap, a narrow vertical aperture, not planned as a view, simply the result of a small street meeting a larger one at an oblique angle. And through this gap, if the angle is right, if you're standing in the precise correct spot, you can see it. The Iron Tower. It's been visible from various points in the city for almost a year now, growing as the construction progresses, the structure rising above the roof lines of the Champ-de-Mars neighbourhood, and then above the roof lines beyond that, and now above most things south of the river in its part of the city. Monsieur Eiffel, who is an engineer of genuine distinction, the bridge works and the viaducts and the internal armature of the Statue of Liberty, all to his credit, has been given permission to build a 300-metre lattice iron tower on the Champ-de-Mars for the Exposition Universelle that will open in May of next year, the centenary celebration of the Revolution. The tower is not finished. It is perhaps 200 metres complete. The upper third not yet assembled, and what stands is a skeleton, a massive triangular iron skeleton tapering as it rises, the lattice work opening and closing as the eye moves up it, the whole structure catching the light differently than stone does, differently than wood does, doing something with the winter sun that nothing else in the city does, its openness allowing the sky to show through it, from multiple angles simultaneously so that it reads differently depending on exactly where you're standing. It is, you think, probably the ugliest thing you've ever seen. It is also possibly the most extraordinary thing you've ever seen. Both things are true at once. You've been thinking about this since you first saw it appearing above the roof lines in the spring, trying to decide which assessment wins, and you've concluded that they don't compete. The tower is ugly and extraordinary simultaneously, in the way that many genuinely new things are, in the way that things which have no precedent can't be evaluated by aesthetic standards developed for other things. There's a petition. 300 artists and writers signed it and published it in Le Temps last year, calling the tower a blot on the city, a disgrace to French taste, a monstrous metal column. Maupassant eats lunch in the tower's restaurant reportedly, specifically because it's the one point in Paris from which the tower isn't visible. You've heard Bertrand's opinion on the tower, which is that it represents the triumph of engineering vanity over architectural civilization, and that it will be torn down in 20 years when the exposition is over, as scheduled. You've heard Laurent the painter's opinion, expressed once through the courtyard as he leaned from his window in the evening, which is that it's a scandal, but an interesting one. You've heard Fernand's opinion, which is that he doesn't know why people are so upset about an iron structure when there are iron bridges and iron railway stations and iron everything, and nobody's petitioned about those. You have your own opinion, which is that it's being built to celebrate the centenary of the Revolution in a city where Maurice Pellerin next door is 3 weeks behind on his rent, and there's something in that which feels relevant to the nature of the Revolution, which you're not sure whether to find funny or painful, and which you keep to yourself because it's not the kind of opinion that helps you at the composing case. You finish your soup. You hand the bowl back to Josephine, who takes it with the minimal motion of a woman for whom this transaction happens 60 times a day, and who has therefore reduced it to its essential elements. You go back to the shop. The afternoon passes. The silk import article from the morning session continues and concludes, and then Vaillant takes it, and you move to the evening editorial, which is about a factory accident in the Saint-Denis suburb, and which requires care with names and numbers and a specific kind of reading while setting that the accident narrative requires. following the sequence of events in the text to make sure the letters you're translating to lead actually represent what happened in the order it happened and not the order someone's handwriting suggests. Your right hand aches. This is a constant of the afternoon. It starts around 2, the particular ache that lives in the second and third metacarpal bones behind the middle fingers, where the motion of reaching for type concentrates its repetitive stress. You learned about metacarpals from another compositor in Clermont, who'd been set in type for 15 years and whose right hand had a visible asymmetry in the knuckle area from the accumulated effect of the work. You think about his hand sometimes in the afternoon. At 6:30, Bertrand calls the hour. The press in the back room has been running at full pace for the last 2 hours, the rhythm of it filling the floor, and when it stops, the composing room is suddenly and completely quiet in a way that takes a moment to register. The day's editions are done. You redistribute the used type back to its cells, a task that requires as much attention as setting it, each letter going back to its correct position, an error here meaning a wrong letter in tomorrow's composition, and wash your hands, the white spirit solution, the brush, the grey water, the grey hands. You put on your coat, win the scarf, and go out into the evening. Rue des Boulangers at 7 in the evening is a different street from the one you left 12 hours ago. The morning's purposeful urgency has settled into something more settled, more heterogeneous. Workers coming home, children released from wherever they've been all day into the available space between buildings. The wine merchant 2 doors from your building doing the heaviest business of his day, his counter barely visible through the men leaning at it, with the absorbed attention of people at their most important evening task. The chestnut woman is on her corner. You buy a cone for 2 centimes, the paper warm immediately in your hands, the chestnuts too hot to eat yet in the way chestnuts always are when you first buy them. You carry them home, the passage, the courtyard. The courtyard at 7 is lit from above by the building's occupied windows, warm orange light coming from a dozen sources, thrown down into the grey rectangle, overlapping and mixing so that the courtyard floor has the quality of a floor lit by many candles from different heights simultaneously. The light not flat but dimensional, full of soft shadows at the edges. You stand for a moment. Above you, on the 6th floor, you can see the light in the Pellerin window. Maurice's voice, indistinct, not the drunk voice, the daughter's voice, a question, that specific asking tone, Colette answering, normal sounds, Tuesday evening sounds. From the 2nd floor, Laurent's violin, not scales tonight, something else, an actual melody, tentative but committed, pausing occasionally as he recovers a note he's lost, going back, finding it, continuing. You stand in the courtyard and listen for a moment because the melody is genuinely becoming something. 3 months of scales arriving at a destination. From the 3rd floor, goat. From the 5th floor, Thibault's cough, evening phase. The building breathes. You go up. In your room, you eat the last piece of bread and the cheese you bought Monday from the stall on the Rue Monge. The cheese hard and slightly past its best, but still cheese. Still the thing that makes bread into a meal. You eat at the table, standing, reading 3 pages of Le Capitaine Fracasse by candlelight. The swashbuckling characters in their theatrical poverty, their magnificent rags, the 17th century adventures of people who are poor in ways that are narratively satisfying rather than just cold and expensive. And then you sit on the bed and let the book close. The building at 8 in the evening, the violin from below, finally finding the melody's resolution. The children on the 3rd floor going through their nighttime process. The 4th floor couple, whose argument structure you've learned as well as the Pellerins, moving through their Tuesday version of it, lower stakes than the weekend version, more habit than genuine conflict. Thibaut. Thibaut's cough is different tonight. You've been telling yourself this for 3 weeks, telling yourself that different is the wrong word, that coughs change, that the body's response to illness modulates over time, and this doesn't mean anything beyond modulation. It means something. The quieter cough, the longer silences, the cough of a body that is losing the argument with what's in its lungs. You've asked nobody about Monsieur Thibaut. Not Fernand, not Madame Vidal, not Céleste Martin. You've wanted to ask. The wanting has been specific and persistent, a question that presents itself several times daily and is each time set aside, because asking would be acknowledging what the cough means, and acknowledging what the cough means would mean knowing something you've been choosing not to fully know. What the cough means is tuberculosis, the white plague, the old people's lung sickness, the disease that has been taking one in 7 Parisians for as long as anyone can reliably measure. The disease that lives in the moisture of buildings like this one, in the cold and the damp and the close quarters of 43 people sharing 2 toilets and a water pump. The disease that has been overhead for 11 months. You lie down with your coat over the blanket. The candle is low. You let it burn. From the Pellerin room, Maurice's voice. Later now, starting to blur at the edges. Colette's voice. Careful. The daughter. Already quiet. Already asleep probably. The particular silence of a sleeping child which has a different quality from a sleeping adult. From above, the cough, going through its phases. From the street, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday evening in the 5th arrondissement winding toward its end. You think about rooms, all the rooms you've lived in. The room in Clermont-Ferrand where you grew up, large enough to be a room rather than a space, with a window that looked onto a street where you could see the sky without adjusting your angle of sight. The room you shared during your apprenticeship, larger than this, with 2 beds and a foot of space between them that seemed at the time like inadequacy and now seems like amplitude. This room, you have had in this room less privacy than in any other room you've lived in. You have also known people more fully here than in any other circumstances, known them without intending to, known them through walls and floors and the involuntary transmission of sound through plaster and wood. The Pellerins, who you've never spoken to beyond the basic corridor acknowledgements, whose life you know in the way you know a piece of music heard repeatedly, not understood intellectually but felt, the rhythms internalized, the variations expected or surprising against the baseline of what you know is normal for them. There's a pamphlet someone left at the print shop, a concerned pamphlet, the genre Bertrand calls le genre inquiet, because its authors are always deeply worried about things they never do anything about the housing conditions of the Paris working poor. Its author, who lives presumably in the 8th arrondissement, writes about the surpeuplement, the overcrowding, the moral dangers of multiple families sharing spaces without adequate separation, the health risks, the social deformation that comes from lives without private space. He's not wrong about any of it. The data he cites are real data. The health risks are real risks. The overcrowding is overcrowding. But the pamphlet has nothing to say about this. The strange intimacy of it. The involuntary community. The fact that you know Maurice Pellerin's voice in every register, and Colette Pellerin's strategies, and Laurent's musical progress, and Fernand's footstep, and Thibaut's cough, and that all of them know the equivalent about you, know your hours, your movements, your patterns, and that this mutual knowledge, involuntary and unacknowledged, is nonetheless a kind of knowing. Something, not friendship, not community in any deliberate sense. Something else, something more basic, the simple fact of proximity making its mark. The candle gutters, you let it go out. The room is dark, lit only by the faint glow of the Paris sky through the skylight, the ambient light of a city that never achieves full dark. You lie still. Above, Thibault coughing. Left, the Pellerins, Maurice's voice winding down towards sleep. Outside, the city, its Tuesday evening self. Something is going to change. You can feel it the way you can feel the cold in the room when the temperature drops another degree, a slight increase in the pressure of things. Maurice's argument on Monday night had that desperate quality, the higher pitch of a man making arguments he knows have already been decided against him. The rent is due at the end of the week, 12 francs a month. You don't know how far behind they are. You don't want to know how far behind they are. You know what happens when you get too far behind. You've been 3 weeks late once. 3 weeks, at the point where you had a fever for 10 days in November and missed 9 shifts at the shop and came back to a pay dock and a month where the arithmetic didn't work. Madame Vidal knocked on your door on the 24th. Not the rent collector, Madame Vidal herself, which means more, which means she had been noting the situation and had reached the threshold of mentioning it. You'd paid by the 26th. You think about this. You think about the Pellerins. The city is full of them. The families positioned at the exact edge of what they can afford, one bad month away from the question you don't want to think about. The ones for whom Paris is both the place they came to for better and the place that continually requires more of them than they have. This is not news. This is not what the pamphlets discovered. This is what the city is. You drift. The sounds of the building work their way into the place between waking and sleeping, the threshold where sounds become something else, not heard but felt, not interpreted but incorporated. Thibault's cough from above becomes something rhythmic and oceanic, the regular beat of a process you're no longer afraid of tonight. Tonight, you're just too tired to be afraid of it. Maurice's final mumbled words become unintelligible as sounds, and cease to be language and become just sound. The city outside becomes the city, continuous and impervious and vast. You are Lucien Moreau, 22 years old, compositor, son of a watchmaker, resident of 6B. You have a trade, you have a key on a shelf, you have 3 letters from your mother and a borrowed book and a cone of chestnuts you forgot to finish eating. You are warm enough, fed enough, behind your locked door. Wednesday comes the way Wednesdays always come in February, which is without ceremony and without mercy. The church bell on the Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève striking 5 in the same register it uses for every other day. The sound travelling through the skylight glass and into your sleep, with the particular rudeness of a sound that doesn't know or care what it's interrupting. What it's interrupting is a dream about Clermont-Ferrand. The specific dream you have sometimes, the one where the city is exactly as you left it, but somehow also not, where the streets of your childhood are combined with streets from somewhere else, the logic of sleep geography that makes complete sense inside the dream and dissolves the moment you try to hold it after waking. You've stopped trying. The dream is the dream, and the room is the room, and the bell is the bell, and this is Wednesday. The room is 4 degrees. Your breath clouds. You lie still for 1 extra minute. This is a luxury you negotiate with yourself most mornings. 1 minute against the margin. 60 seconds of not yet being up, which costs you 60 seconds somewhere else in the day, but which is, And this matters, you've decided it matters. A small act of self-determination in a life that has very little of those. You're in this room for 60 seconds because you choose to be, not because the work hasn't started yet. Then you get up. The corridor has its Wednesday morning configuration. Fernand already at the toilet end when you emerge, acknowledging you with the minimum possible motion of the head. The fourth floor couple's door ajar, someone inside moving, the smell of coal already finding its way under their door from the corridor stove. From above, nothing. The fifth floor landing, when you pass it going for water, is quiet in a way you've learned to distinguish from sleep quiet. The door to Thibault's room, still the second on the left, is the flat quiet, the held breath quiet. You stand at the pump in the courtyard. Wednesday is colder than Tuesday. The courtyard walls amplify the cold the way courtyard walls amplify everything, reflecting it back from four sides, creating a still pocket of February that has been accumulating since midnight with nothing to disturb it. Celeste Martin is already finishing at the pump. This morning she doesn't say your name. She nods. You nod. The word was Tuesdays. Wednesday has the nod. You pump your water. The handle is colder than yesterday. Your hands white-knuckle around it and the water comes in its steam-trailing stream into the bucket, and you watch it rise and think about nothing in particular, which is the thing you've learned to do at the pump, the deliberate vacancy that is the morning's first small practice of self-preservation. By the time you've dressed and eaten and descended and crossed the passage past Madame Vidal's curtained window, the street is doing its Wednesday version of itself, which is indistinguishable from Tuesday's version to anyone who hasn't lived here long enough to notice the small differences. Wednesday's boulangerie smell is exactly Tuesday's boulangerie smell. The concierge across the street sweeps with the same motion. The Seine under the Petit Pont is the same grey-green moving thing going the same direction at the same pace. You set type, you eat soup, you set more type. The afternoon aches in the same tendons. What's different is the quality of attention in the building when you return. You notice it in the courtyard before you can name it. It's not a sound or a smell or any specific thing. It's more like a change in pressure. The way the air in a room changes when more people are paying attention to the same thing at the same time, even if none of them are saying what it is they're paying attention to. Fernand is at the pump again. He doesn't need to be at the pump. You can see from the way he's standing that he's not pumping, he's just standing near it. His blue-green hands at his sides, his cup absent for once. He looks up when you enter the courtyard. His expression is the expression of a man who knows something and is deciding how much of it to offer. Rent agent was here, he says, not to you specifically, to the courtyard, to whoever might be crossing it. You stop. He was at the Pellerins' door, 6:15, with a letter. Fernand looks at the building's façade, the kind with the seal on it. You know what the seal means, the prefecture stamp, the official stamp that goes on documents that have the force of something behind them. How long, you ask? Fernand shrugs. I didn't ask. He picks up his absent cup, finds it absent, puts his hands back at his sides. 3 months, someone said. 4th floor, they said 3 months. 3 months. 3 months at 12 francs is 36 francs. 36 francs is almost a full month of what Maurice earns when he's working, which he hasn't been for the last month. You know this from the wall, from the specific texture of his voice when he's been working versus when he hasn't, from Colette's voice adjusting its register to account for the changed circumstances. You go up the stairs. At the 5th floor landing, you stop again. Thibault's door. The same flat quiet. And then, as you stand there, a sound. Not the cough. something else. A small sound, interior, a sound like someone adjusting their weight on a bed frame, the sound of someone present, horizontal, awake, the sound of someone conserving motion. You stand there for 4 seconds, 5, you raise your hand and knock. The sound you make on the door is neither the knock of someone who has reason to be there, nor the knock of someone who has permission. It's the knock of someone acting on something they can't quite name, a provisional knock, a knock that is already prepared to apologize. Silence on the other side. Then, who is it? The voice is Thibault's voice, but reduced. The same voice you've heard through the ceiling for 11 months, but smaller now. The voice of a body that has been rationing its energies for a while and is not going to spend one on volume if it doesn't have to. Moreau, you say, from downstairs. A pause. The sound of someone calculating. What do you want? And you realise you don't have an answer prepared. You knocked on the door because something told you to knock, and now the door hasn't opened, and you're standing in the 5th floor corridor with an explanation that doesn't exist yet. I wanted to ask if you needed anything, you say, from outside. If there was something you needed that I could bring. Another pause, longer this time. Bread, he says. If you're going to the boulangerie. Tomorrow morning, you say. I'll knock. Yes, he says. You go upstairs. You sit on your bed with your coat still on and your chestnuts on the table cooling, and you think about the sealed letter and Fernand's expression and Thibault's reduced voice, and you think, the building is at a moment, not a crisis, not yet, but a moment. The kind of moment you've read about in history, in the books you borrowed at the Claremont Library before you came here. The moment when things that have been accumulating in the background arrive in the foreground all at once. Not dramatically, not with the machinery of drama, just the background has been background long enough, and now it's here, in the corridor, in the flat silence of a sick man's room, in the official letter with the prefecture seal. Thursday. Thursday morning begins as Wednesday did, and Tuesday before it, and every morning in this building, the pump and the cold and the staircase and the street. You knock on Thibault's door on your way down, and he opens it. He opens it, which is different from Wednesday. The door actually opens this time, and you see him. Monsieur Thibault, 61 years old, retired government clerk. You've passed him on the stairs perhaps 20 times, and registered him as a figure, a thin man in a dark coat, grey-haired, the coat clean and pressed, but wearing in a way that indicated it was the only coat. Now, standing in the doorway, he is what he is, which is a man in the late stages of something he has probably known about for longer than anyone in this building has. He's thin in the way of illness rather than habit. His face has the specific hollowness of someone whose body has been drawing on reserves that are nearly exhausted. The cheekbones prominent in a way that is not quite the normal topography of his face. The skin around his eyes carrying a greyness that is not tiredness. He's dressed, collar buttoned. This is the thing that registers most, that he is fully dressed at 6 in the morning in the way of a man for whom being dressed is a form of resistance. A choice made each morning that constitutes his terms of engagement with what's happening. You hand him the bread. Half a loaf bought this morning, warm still from the boulangerie. He takes it, looks at you. How long have you been at 6B? He asks. 11 months. I've been at 5D for 6 years. He says this with a tone that is not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. The tone of someone citing a fact that represents something more than the fact itself. I was here when the last concierge was here, before Madame Vidal, a man named Dupuis, very different disposition. He doesn't say what disposition Madame Vidal has, and you don't ask. "Thank you for the bread," he says. He closes the door. You go to work. The day has the specific quality of a day that is proceeding normally on its surface while something else is proceeding beneath it. You set type. Bertrand finds no errors in Wednesday's galleys, which means you don't make eye contact about Clermont. Arnaud borrows your composing stick without asking, and you retrieve it without comment. The afternoon ache arrives on schedule. You're back at the building at 7. The rent agent is in the passage, not coming or going, standing. In the passage between the entrance arch and Madame Vidal's door, talking to Madame Vidal through the partially open window, the two of them in a conversation that stops when you enter from the street, both faces turning toward you, with a particular calibration of people who've been discussing something they weren't expecting to be observed doing. The rent agent is a small man in his 40s with a leather case and the face of someone who has learned to make his face reveal nothing, while his presence reveals everything. He nods at you in the way you nod at someone whose name you know and are not going to use. You cross through to the courtyard. The courtyard is wrong. Not the pump or the paving stones or the smell or any physical thing. The quality of the light from the windows is wrong. Not wrong like broken or dangerous. Wrong like the specific wrongness of a building holding its breath. The second-floor window dark, though Laurent is usually home by now. The third-floor window lit and still. No goat sounds, no children sounds. The Bazin family in their version of the stillness. The first-floor window, Céleste Martin at her table. Not visible, but her lamp throwing its steady light into the courtyard in a way that suggests a person who is sitting very still and listening. From above, the Pellerin window, lit. Two voices, not arguing. That's the thing, not arguing. After months of argument through the wall, the voices from the Pellerin room tonight are low and even and close together, in the way of people who are having a conversation they have decided to have. The kind of conversation that doesn't produce argument, because what it's discussing is beyond the point where argument is the relevant response. Fernand is not in the courtyard. His window is lit. You go upstairs. Through your wall, the voices continue. Lower than conversation usually is in that room. Maurice's voice has a quality you haven't heard from it before. Sober, careful. The voice of a man who has understood something and is in the early stages of determining what to do with that understanding. Colette's voice in response, not the careful register, a different one. The voice of a woman who already understood this some time ago and has been waiting for the conversation to catch up. The daughter is quiet. You eat your bread and cheese. You read 2 pages of Le Capitaine Fracasse. You don't retain them. At some point the voices through the wall stop. The room goes to its sleep sounds. Maurice's breathing, which you know has a slight catch in it, at the transition between inhale and exhale. A sound so familiar by now that its absence would be more notable than its presence. From above, Thibault's cough, the February version, quieter now than last week. You lie down. Friday passes. Saturday, the rent falls due. You pay yours at 9 in the morning, an envelope through Madame Vidal's window with exact amount in coins, because you have learned that Madame Vidal's regard for you correlates directly with the precision of payment and the promptness of delivery, and that both of these are worth maintaining as facts in her ledger. You spend the morning at the laundry house on the Rue Monge. 2 hours of your week reserved for the bain-douche, the shower cabinet, 50 centimes, lukewarm water, a towel that is clean if not new. and for the washing of the smaller items you carry with you, the things that can be washed and dried by Monday in the warmth of your room. Your shirt, which you wash in the basin provided, and wring until your forearms burn and hang on the nail above your table, where it drips onto the floor for 3 hours and dries by midnight if you're lucky. You're back in the building by noon. The Pellerin door is open, not ajar. Open, wide open, all the way to the wall, the way a door is open when the people who usually close it aren't thinking about whether it's closed. You stop in the corridor. The room. You've been beside it for 11 months and you've never seen inside it, because the door has always been closed, because closed doors are the tenement's only available form of the privacy it denies in every other respect. The closed door is the agreement. I know you're there, and you know I'm there, and this closed door is the line we maintain between us. The door is open. The room is approximately the same size as yours. Of course it is. You knew this from the wall, from the sounds, from the physics of the building that put you both in rooms carved from the same floor plan. But knowing and seeing are different. There is a bed, iron frame, larger than yours, occupying more of the room, a necessity when 3 people share a room where 2 is already a compression, a table, a wardrobe against the wall opposite the door, its left handle broken. You've heard this handle stick and fail approximately 400 times. 2 chairs, a wooden crate in the corner with the daughter's things piled on it, a book, a doll with a squeaking mechanism, a length of ribbon, the particular anthology of small objects that constitutes a 6-year-old's world. Colette is standing at the table. She's folding something, a piece of cloth, folding it with the focused care of someone who is finding tasks to do that require her full attention. Her hands are moving steadily. Her back is to the door. You don't speak. You've been beside this woman for 11 months, and you've exchanged perhaps 8 direct words with her. The corridor minimum and the door being open doesn't change the protocol. You go to your room. You close your door. From next door the sounds of packing begin, not all at once, in stages. The specific sounds, cloth against cloth, the wooden knock of objects moved from one surface to another, the rasp of the crate being dragged, are the sounds of a woman who has decided to be thorough about this process. The sounds of someone packing carefully, item by item, in the manner of a person who is taking this seriously, who is not going to let this be done to her in a way that's careless, who is going to manage the details she can manage. Maurice, for the first hour, is not there. You know this from the absence of his particular footstep. The daughter. You can hear her faintly, the presence of a child who's been told something and is trying to be small about it. The constrained quietness of a 6-year-old who has understood that now is not the time for the normal volume of being 6. At some point in the early afternoon, you've been sitting on your bed doing nothing, unable to read, unable to sleep, the sounds through the wall making all other activity feel beside the point. Madame Vidal's knock comes to the Pellerin door. Not your door, theirs. You hear it through the wall. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the administrative knock, the knock of someone who represents something beyond herself and wants you to know it. Colette's footstep to the door. Madame Vidal's voice, short, even, giving the time. Monday. The rooms must be vacated by Monday. This is not news. You understand from the compressed, efficient way Colette says yes that this was already known, but it is now official, delivered, recorded. The door closes. Through the wall, silence. Not the sleeping silence or the conversation silence. A silence that has a shape in it, A person standing still in the middle of a room, taking stock of a thing that is now confirmed. Then the sounds of packing resume. Sunday morning. You should be at Mass. You're not at Mass. You've been not at Mass for most of the Sundays you've lived in this building, which you note without significant guilt, having decided that the God who is available at the church on the Rue des Boulangers is available in other locations too, and that your relationship with him can be conducted in the 5th arrondissement without requiring your presence in his official local office. What you do instead, this Sunday, is take the staircase down to the ground floor at 9 in the morning, cross the passage, and go out onto the street and walk. You walk south and west, away from the river, up into the streets above the Rue Mouffetard that climb toward the heights of the 5th. The streets are Sunday quiet, the particular quiet of a city that is not asleep, but is temporarily released from its own urgency. The cafes open but unhurried, the few people moving at Sunday pace. You pass a church whose doors are open and from which organ music is coming, a few notes then stopping, the organist practicing or warming up or thinking in music. You keep walking. Up. The streets of the 5th get steeper as they approach the escarpment, the old city that predates Haussmann's reconstruction. The streets that survived the great redevelopment because they were too steep and too small to bother with, or because they connected things that needed to stay connected, and they're still here, narrow and old and climbing. The buildings on either side leaning slightly toward each other at the upper stories, in the way of buildings that were built before engineers worried about such things. At the top of the Rue Thouin, where it meets the Place de l'Estrapade, you stop. From here, looking north, you can see a section of Paris that the building's courtyard view doesn't give you. The roof lines of the 4th and 3rd arrondissements, the pale blocks of Haussmann's reconstruction, the dome of the Pantheon off to your left rising above the surrounding buildings with the confident geometry of something that was designed to dominate the skyline from every approach, and has been succeeding at this since 1791. Straight ahead the river, a silver strip in the winter light. Beyond it the right bank, and to the west you have to turn slightly, have to find the angle between two buildings, the tower. It looks different from elevation. From the streets it appears above roof lines in sections, always partly obstructed, never fully itself. From up here you can see more of it, the lower portions visible above the intervening buildings, the iron lattice against the pale Sunday sky. It is still not finished. The upper third still to be assembled, the final form still theoretical. But what stands already is enough to understand the scale of the thing, the way it will stand when it's done, visible from how many of these rooftop vantage points, visible from the hills of Montmartre to the north, visible from the windows of buildings that don't yet know they'll spend their existence in the shadow of a structure that didn't exist when their foundations were laid. You stand in the cold for longer than is comfortable. Across the city, 43 people in your building are going about their Sunday. Madame Vidal is wherever Madame Vidal goes when she's not at her window. Céleste Martin is at Mass, probably, or visiting family, her Sunday clothing impeccable. Laurent is sleeping, or painting, or playing scales that are now becoming a melody. Fernand is writing one of his letters to Normandy, which he does every Sunday. The letters that go out on Monday morning past Madame Vidal's window, regular as the rent. Thibault is in his room. The Pellerins are in their room for the last 2 days of it. You are here, on this small height, looking at a city that is beautiful from this angle, in a way it is not beautiful from the inside of 6B. Looking at the iron tower that divides opinion, and the river that doesn't care about opinion, and the rooftops of a million people's lives all arranged before you without any of the detail that makes a single life difficult. This is the city, the same city. From up here you can hold both things at once more easily than from inside them. The beauty and the 12 francs a month, the dome of the Pantheon and the sealed letter from the prefecture, the Iron Tower going up for the centenary of the Revolution, and Maurice Pellerin standing in a courtyard with his furniture. Both things are true. Both things are the city. You've been here long enough to know this without having to decide which one is the real one. The real one is both. That's the answer, which is not a comfortable answer, but is, you've come to believe, the accurate one. You turn away from the view and walk back down. Monday begins before you're ready for it, which is how Mondays work. You hear the rent collectors knock at 7 in the morning while you're still lacing your boots. A different knock from Madame Vidal's. Official and preliminary. A knock that comes with a piece of paper behind it. You sit on your bed with your boot in your hands and listen. The conversation in the corridor is brief. 2 voices, neither of them Maurice. Colette and the rent collector's man, who speaks in the tone of someone reciting a procedure he has recited before and will recite again, and who has developed the specific neutral competence of a person for whom this procedure is work rather than event. The word summation, the word délai expiré, the word expulsion. Colette says something, 1 sentence, her voice completely even. The rent collector's man says something brief, which is the end of the conversation. Footsteps away down the corridor. Colette closes the Pellerin door. For a moment, silence. Then, from next door, the sound of movement with purpose. Not packing. The packing is done. Movement with direction. The sound of a family preparing to leave a room. You put on your boot. You lace it. You put on the other. You don't leave. You sit on the bed and you wait, because going out now means being in the corridor when they come out, and the corridor is 4 feet wide, and there is no way to be in it when the Pellerins emerge with their crate and their things without that being what it is, which is witnessing, and you don't know yet if witnessing is something you have the right to do. The Pellerin door opens, footsteps, Colette's, lighter ones, the daughter. The scraping sound of the crate being moved into the corridor. Maurice's heavier footstep. They're moving down the corridor, down the stairs. You sit. After a moment you stand up and open your door. The corridor is empty. The Pellerin door is open. The room visible behind it, already emptier than it was yesterday. The crate gone. One of the chairs gone. The room beginning its transition from their space to available space. You go down. In the courtyard, the Pellerins' furniture has been arranged in the grey rectangle by 2 men you don't recognise, who are there helping Maurice move things. The wardrobe has come down. The same wardrobe with the broken left handle. Moving through the building's narrow spaces with the resistance of an object that has long since been adapted to the room it lived in, and has not yet adapted to being elsewhere. The iron bed comes down in sections, the table, the 2 chairs remaining, the crate with the daughter's things, the doll, the ribbon, the book, 4 bundles of clothing and household items, 1 cooking pot, 1 pan. This is the Pellerin room, made exterior, made visible, the private inventory of a life conducted in 12 square metres now displayed in the courtyard of a building, whose 43 residents have each found a reason to be present or near. Fernand is at the pump, not pumping, standing near the pump with his blue-green hands crossed at his wrists, watching with the expression of a man who has seen things before and is watching this one too, because you watch things when they happen, even the things you don't want to watch. Celeste Martin at the foot of the stairs, her shawl around her, talking to the woman from the first floor whose name you've never established. Both of them talking in the low voice of people who are performing calm. The painter Laurent at his window 2 floors up, his forearms on the sill looking down. Madame Vidal in the passage doorway, not in the passage, at the edge of it, watching. Colette Pellerin is standing beside the iron bed frame in the centre of the courtyard. She's wearing her good coat and her hat with the black ribbon, and her gloves, the Sunday gloves, worn today on a Monday in February. She stands very straight. Her face is the face of a woman who has decided that her face will reveal nothing, and has been maintaining this decision for the last 2 days and is still maintaining it now. The daughter stands beside her, both hands around the doll, holding it against her chest in the grip of a child who has understood that some things need to be held close. She's not crying. She watches the men move the furniture with the wide-eyed attention of someone trying to understand a situation that the adults around her have not fully explained. Maurice is helping with the wardrobe. He is sober. You can see this from the way he moves. Deliberate, controlled. The movements of a man who has made a decision to be sober for this, who is doing this last thing with full clarity. His face carries the expression of someone for whom the clarity is worse than the alternative would have been. The specific expression of a man who knows exactly what is happening and would, if the option were available, know it less. The men work quickly. It takes less time to empty a room than it takes to fill one, because filling requires decisions and emptying is just physics. The courtyard fills with the Pellerins' furniture. Nobody says anything to them. This is not unkindness. This is the arrangement, the same arrangement that governs the corridor acknowledgements and the pump greetings and the things everyone knows and nobody mentions. You know everything about the Pellerins, and the Pellerins know something equivalent about you and the courtyard watches and the deal, the unspoken deal that makes 43 people's lives in this building possible, is that you don't name what you see, but you see it. The daughter tugs at Colette's sleeve. Colette looks down. Something moves through her face, a crack in the maintained expression, a flash of something that is more complex than anything one word would cover. She says something very quiet to the daughter, leaning down, her voice so low it doesn't carry. The daughter nods, squeezes the doll, stops looking at the furniture and looks at her mother instead. You stand near the door to the stairwell, not near anyone in particular, and you watch. Maurice straightens from helping with the wardrobe. He stands in the courtyard between his furniture and his family with his hands at his sides and his face doing something that is not the drunk face, and not the desperate face you heard through the wall on Monday night, but something else, something that comes after both of those. The face of a man who has arrived somewhere on the far side of fight and surrender both. Somewhere that is just, this is what happened. Fernand catches your eye across the courtyard. Neither of you says anything. A cart arrives at 3 o'clock. A man Colette knows, a cousin or brother-in-law, with a horse and a flat cart, and the efficient competence of someone doing something practical to resolve a situation. The furniture goes onto the cart with more speed than it came down the stairs. Maurice lifts and carries without speaking. The men who came with the cart lift and carry. The daughter is put on top of the wardrobe on the cart, sitting with her doll, watching the courtyard from her elevated position, with the expression of someone who has been placed somewhere for safekeeping and is accepting this role. Colette Pellerin stands in the middle of the courtyard for one moment after the last bundle goes onto the cart. She looks at the building. 4 sides of windows. The building's interior face, stone and glass, the backs of people's lives. Then she walks through the passage to the street. The cart follows. Maurice last. The archway swallows them. The courtyard is the courtyard. The pump is the pump. The paving stones show no evidence of having held a family's furniture for 3 hours. The grey February air fills the space that the furniture occupied and is indistinguishable from the grey February air that didn't occupy that space. Fernand says nothing for a long time. Then, "They're going to the sisters in the 11th. "Yes," you say. "You. Her husband's a tinsmith. They'll manage." "Yes," you say. You both stand there for a moment more. Then Fernand picks up his cup, which he apparently had with him all along, and goes inside. You go inside, the Pellerin corridor, the open door, the empty room. You stand in the doorway of 6C for a moment. The room is smaller than you imagined when you were beside it. Not physically smaller, the same dimensions, but smaller in the way that rooms are smaller when they're empty, when the furniture that broke the space into zones is gone, and you can see the full extent of the floor and the full height of the wall and the full distance from the door to the window. The marks on the wall where the wardrobe stood for however many years. A darker rectangle of wallpaper, the pattern preserved where it was protected. The small patch of floor beside the window that's lighter than the surrounding boards, as if someone stood there often, stood and looked out at whatever a 6th-floor window on the Rue des Boulangers offers by way of view. The window looks into the courtyard. You close the door. You go to your room. Your room, 6 feet wide, 8 feet long. The bed, the table, the shelf, the composing stick on the nail, the mirror shard above the table, the letters from your mother, the key on the shelf. You sit on the bed and don't think for a while. What there is to think about you already know, which is that this is how it works. This is what happens. The room fills and empties and fills again, and the building continues, and the pump continues, and Madame Vidal continues, and the city continues, and individuals pass through its structures the way the Seine water passes through the Pont Neuf's arches. Continuously, unremarkably, each passage indistinguishable from the last, except the person passing. It's remarkable to the person. That evening you knock on Thibault's door again. You've been doing this each morning, and now you do it in the evening too. You're not sure when you decided this. It happened gradually in the way of decisions you make without noticing you're making them. You bring him bread again. This time you bring a small piece of the hard sausage you bought on Saturday too, and the paper bag of onions from the market stall, which cost you almost nothing. He opens the door more quickly than on Thursday. He's still dressed, still the collar buttoned. But there are shadows under his eyes that have deepened since Thursday. The topography of his face a little more pronounced. He looks at the sausage and the onions. "You didn't have to," he says. "I was already going past the stall." He looks at you for a moment. His eyes are still clear. Whatever is happening in his chest hasn't reached his eyes yet. "The Pellerins went today," he says. "Yes, I heard it. The furniture on the stairs." He takes the bread and the sausage and the onions. "Pellerin was behind before. Paid off once and fell behind again. That's how it works." "Yes?" He looks at the onions. "I'll make soup," he says, with the tone of a man who is claiming something, who's saying, "I still make things. I still do this." "Good night," you say. "Good night." March arrives the way seasons arrive in Paris, which is not with any clear declaration but with small increments that accumulate, until one day you notice the smell of something in the air that is not coal smoke, not river mud, not cold stone. Something that is just slightly different. A molecular shift in the morning air that turns out to be the beginning of temperature change. The first week of March, you stop seeing your breath indoors. The second week, the ice on the inside of the skylight doesn't form. The third week, you come home from the print shop and the building smell has shifted. The coal fire's burning lower now that the cold requires them less. The building's own baseline smell emerging from beneath the smoke. Stone and damp plaster, and the particular minerally smell of old buildings that have been absorbing Paris for a long time. The Pellerin room gets a new tenant on the 15th of March. A young woman. Her name is Thérèse Bonnet. She's 24 years old. She's from Lyon and she works as a seamstress in a workshop near the Place de la République. A 40-minute walk each way through the city's morning and evening crowds. She arrives with a bundle and a sewing box and a cat, which is not strictly permitted but which Madame Vidal has apparently decided to note without acting on. You hear all of this within the first 2 weeks, not because anyone tells you, because the wall tells you. Thérèse's sounds are completely different from the Pellerins. She lives alone, which means there is one set of footsteps, one voice, the particular one-person acoustic of a room occupied by someone who talks to herself sometimes, not to the cat, though she talks to the cat too, in the specific gentle register people use with animals that they live alone with, but to herself, quietly, as she works. The sewing sounds, the pull of thread, the small click of a needle against a thimble, occasionally the snipping of scissors. The cat makes a brief appearance in your auditory world each morning when it mews at Thérèse's door, having spent the night somewhere and requesting readmission. This happens at approximately 5:30. You've incorporated it into the morning sequence. You knock on Thibault's door each morning and each evening through March. He opens the door less quickly as the month progresses, not because he's asleep. You can hear him awake. The cough tells you he's awake. The cough is now with him continuously in a way it wasn't in February. The day cough and the night cough merged into one continuous state. But because moving to the door costs more than it did. On the 3rd of April, a Wednesday, he doesn't open the door. You knock. You wait. You knock again. You hear him inside, the sound of him, breathing, the cough. But the door doesn't open. "I'm fine," he says through the door. "Leave the bread." You leave the bread on the doorstep and go down. On the 4th of April you knock, and there's no answer. Not no answer in the way of being out. No answer in the way of a room that is doing something with its silence. You knock again. Monsieur Thibault. Nothing. You go down to Madame Vidal's window. This is a significant act. You go to Madame Vidal's window when you have rent or a parcel or a specific inquiry, and you've been to it perhaps 11 times in 11 months. Each visit is noted. Each visit constitutes a transaction, not financial but social, a moment in her ledger under your name. She opens the window. You tell her about the door. Her face remains neutral. She reaches for a key on the board inside her window. She comes out into the passage for the first time in your memory, which means this is an occasion of sufficient weight that her customary window observation is no longer adequate. She goes up the stairs ahead of you. Her pace is the measured pace of a woman who is not hurrying because hurrying would indicate a kind of expectation she's not going to express. The 5th floor, Thibault's door, she knocks. The administrative knock, but softer than usual. Nothing. She uses the key. She opens the door and looks inside. You are one step behind her on the landing, not quite able to see past her into the room. She's inside for perhaps 30 seconds. When she comes back out, her face is the same face it always is, which in this moment communicates everything. She closes the door. She locks it. She looks at you. "I'll send for the doctor," she says. She goes down the stairs. You stand on the 5th floor landing with your hand on the railing. From below, the building continues its Thursday afternoon. The 3rd floor children. The 1st floor Celeste Martin's clock, which you can hear from the landing chiming the hour. From 5D, nothing. The building breathes around the silence of the room, the way a body breathes around a held lung. You go up to your room. You sit on your bed. The ceiling above you is the floor of 5D, the joists, the plaster, the 20 centimetres of building material that has been between you and Thibault for 11 months, through which his cough has travelled every night, which you have listened to and not spoken about and brought bread to, and knocked on a door for, and which has now gone quiet in the way that is permanent. From above, nothing. No cough. The building goes very still. This is what you notice. The building is quiet in a way it hasn't been since you arrived. Not silent. The 3rd floor, the 1st floor, Thérèse next door with her sewing, but quiet in a particular register, as if the building is aware of its own change, as if the 40-odd people in it have all registered simultaneously the absence of a sound that was always present. The cough from the 5th floor that was as much a part of the building's voice as the pump in the morning, or the violin from the 2nd floor. You sit with this for a while. Thibault, who was a government clerk for 30 years, who came to 14 Rue des Boulangers 6 years ago, who'd been in the building when Dupuis was concierge, who dressed every morning with his collar buttoned and accepted bread through a door rather than opening it, and said, "I'll make soup," with the tone of a man who was still making something. The building doesn't mark this. There's no gathering, no formal acknowledgement. It's not that kind of community. In 2 weeks there'll be a new tenant at 5D. Someone will come with a bundle and a letter of introduction, and stand at the pump for the first time and look at the 6 flights of stairs, with the particular look of someone calculating what they've committed to. The room will keep. The room always keeps. That night, for the first time in 11 months, you sleep without the cough above you. You don't sleep well. The silence is wrong. You've been sleeping for 11 months with a particular sound above you, and the absence of it is louder than the sound was. The way a missing tooth is louder in the mouth than the tooth was. The way any subtracted constant becomes its own kind of presence. You lie on your back and listen to a building that is doing something like grieving in its own way, which is to say, continuing. The weeks do what weeks do. April becomes May, and the morning pump ritual shifts its character. Warmer now, the cold of the handle a preference rather than an endurance, the steam gone from the water's surface. The courtyard gets a quality of light in the late afternoon that the winter courtyard didn't have. The sun angle changing enough to find its way in over the south wall for an hour or so around 4, a warm rectangle on the paving stones that the building's residents discover and migrate toward, the way animals migrate toward warmth, sitting on the steps in it, standing near it, not acknowledging why they're standing there. Fernand's hands in spring, the same blue-green but different in the light. Laurent's violin, the melody has progressed. What started as scales became a sequence of notes, became a melody, and the melody has now been through enough variations that you've begun to hear it as a whole thing, a piece, something with a beginning and middle and end. You don't know what it's called. You don't need to know what it's called. Thérèse's cat, whose name is apparently Minou, appears in the courtyard on the first warm morning in May, and sits in the rectangle of light as if it personally accomplished this. The newspaper at Girard's runs stories about the Exposition Universelle preparations. The tower will be finished in time. This is now established. The completion of the upper section is scheduled for March of next year, which means by the time the exposition opens in May, the tower will be standing at its full 300 metres, the tallest structure in the world. Bertrand has ongoing views about this. You buy a newspaper, not Le Moniteur de Commerce, which is work, but Le Temps, which is news, and read the article about the tower's progress on the bench in the square near the Pantheon during your noon break. There's an engraving of it. The engraving makes it look different from the thing you see when you look southwest from the right spots, different from the iron skeleton your eye has been learning to read for a year now. The engraving has a completeness and a formality the actual tower doesn't. The actual tower, still raw, still unfinished, still very much a process rather than a fact. But soon a fact. The article mentions the number of visitors expected for the exposition. 30 million. 30 million people coming to Paris in the summer of 1889. Coming to see what France has made, what progress looks like, what the future is. Coming to see the tower. You fold the paper, 30 million people. In the building where you live, 43 people share one water pump. Both of these facts are true at the same time. This is Paris, June, and the days are long and warm, and the building's dynamics shift with the temperature in the way of all closed spaces when the heat arrives. The 6th floor in June is warm, not the greenhouse of July and August that's still coming, but warm enough that the skylight window, which spends the winter as an adversary, becomes something you're grateful for. The small space of sky visible through it, a source of air movement, a convection column, a path for heat to escape. You work with your coat off for the first time since October. The Bellevue family moves into 5D in the middle of June. A young couple, recently married, from somewhere east. You can hear a slight regional accent in the wife's voice through the ceiling. They're very quiet in the way of people who are newly in a place and haven't yet established their normal volume. They will establish it. Everyone does, eventually. The building's particular acoustic democracy will in time make them as legible to you as the Pellerins were, their rhythms becoming part of the building's vocabulary. You knock on their door the second week with bread, in the way that is apparently now your practice on this staircase. The wife opens the door. She looks at the bread and then at you with an expression of complete bewilderment. From downstairs, you say, "Welcome." She takes the bread. You go back to your room. Through the ceiling that night, their voices, low and warm, the particular register of two people who've recently decided to build something together and are still in the early stages of trusting the decision. A sound that is not like Thibault's sound and not like the Pellerins' sound. A new sound, the building acquiring another voice. From next door, Therese's sewing sounds, the pull and click, the cat's occasional commentary. From below, Laurent's violin, somewhere in the middle of the melody's progression, the section where it builds towards something. The building. You've been here 14 months now. Not the boy from Clermont-Ferrand who arrived in October of last year with 40 francs and a certainty that dissolved in the first week. Not quite the person you'll be in 2 years, or 5, or whatever the years contain. Something in between. Someone who knows which step on the 4th floor creaks. Who knows the quality of the water on cold mornings versus warm ones. Who knows that Madame Vidal's window is never not observing and has made his peace with being observed. Who knows the sound of Fernand Ducrot's specific footstep and the smell of Laurent's turpentine on Mondays when he's been working all weekend and the particular morning voice of Thérèse Bonnet addressing her cat in the kitchen. Who knows that 12 francs a month is the number that separates being here from not being here? Who brought bread to a dying man through a closed door and couldn't bring anything that would change the thing that mattered? Who watched a family's furniture in a courtyard and said yes and nothing else? You've been learning this city one floor at a time, one corridor at a time, one wall at a time, and the city has been doing the same to you, learning you, registering you, absorbing your patterns into its continuous motion the way the Seine absorbs the rain. A Sunday in the middle of June, very warm. The kind of warm June day that makes Paris look like the painting rather than the building's interior, and you take the staircase down and the passage through and the street east along the quay, and you walk for a long time without any particular destination, walking in the way you walk when you have the time to just walk. Past the Jardin des Plantes, where families are spread across the grass in a manner that would be impossible in February, and is now, in June, the obvious thing to do with warm grass and Sunday. Past the Gare d'Austerlitz, where a train is pulling out going south, going toward Lyon, you think, possibly going toward Clermont, possibly carrying someone home for the summer. You watch the train go until it's gone. Then you walk back. The thing about Paris that the pamphlets don't capture, the concern pamphlets, the social question pamphlets, the literary pamphlets, all the genres of writing about Paris produced by people who live in it and need to understand it, is that it is not one city. It's not even two. The rich and the poor, the boulevard and the tenement, the exposition universelle and the courtyard pump. It's more than that. It's as many cities as there are people living in it, each one real, each one complete, each one the whole story from the perspective of the person living it. You live one of those cities, the city of the compositor's black hands and the 6th floor, and the morning queue at the pump, the city of 15-centime soup and the Petit Pont wind and borrowed books, the city that has Monsieur Thibault in it until it doesn't. Someone in a fine apartment in the 8th arrondissement lives a different city, but not a more real one. You come back through the passage at 6 in the evening, Madame Vidal's window, the curtain, the familiar noting, the courtyard, golden in the late June light, the rectangle of sky above it genuinely blue for once, the building walls warm from the day's sun, the pump casting a long shadow across the paving stones. You pump your evening water, carry it up, 6 flights. The weight of it in your hands, the shifting of it with each step, the familiar calculation of 3/4 full. Your room, 6 feet wide, 8 feet long, warm now with the day's accumulated heat, the skylight doing its summer work, the bed, the table, the shelf, the composing stick, the 3 letters from your mother, the key, you sit on the bed, through the ceiling, the Bellevues, their early evening sounds, the wife's voice and the husband's voice in the warm register. Next door, Thérèse's sewing, Minou's commentary, the pull of thread. From below, Laurent's violin arriving, after months of scales and fragments and partial melodies, at something that is finally, actually, a piece, something complete. You lie back on the bed and listen through the floor. You close your eyes. The sounds of the building come through the walls and the floors and the ceiling in the way they've been coming for 14 months, indifferent to your preferences, continuous, the involuntary intimacy of 40-odd lives conducted in proximity without permission. The sounds of people making dinner, people talking quietly, people doing the things people do in the brief window between when the day ends and when the body gives out. The city outside, June warm, still active at this hour, the long June evening giving everyone more time than they usually get. The building breathes. You breathe with it. You are warm. You are fed. The key is on the shelf. Your hands are black. Tomorrow you'll cross the Petit Pont before the city is fully awake. The river grey-green and fast. The towers of Notre Dame catching the first light above the roof lines. Tomorrow the composing case will be cold from the night and will warm to your hands. Tomorrow there will be text in someone's handwriting to be translated into lead, the words of someone else's day becoming the metal of yours. Tomorrow is tomorrow, tonight is this. The building going through its evening and then its night, the sounds settling into their nighttime versions, lower, slower, the violin from below finding its final notes and releasing them. Let the building hold you. It does, regardless. It's been holding you for 14 months, holding all of you, 40-odd people in their rooms, the accumulated weight of all those lives and all those sounds and all those mornings at the pump. It holds without preference, without judgment, without noting who came and who went and what they felt about any of it. The building's job is structural. It does its job. Let the sounds come through the walls the way they've been coming. The Bellevues above, settling towards sleep, their voices going quieter. Therese beside you. The sewing sound stopped now. Minou settled somewhere. The fourth floor, the third, the second. Laurent's violin done, the bow on the stand, the room going into its night. The first floor, Céleste Martin's clock. The ground floor, Madame Vidal's curtained window. The courtyard, empty now in the evening, the pump still, the warm stone of the walls radiating the day's heat into the enclosed air. All of it here, all of it happening. Let your hands unclench from the day's work. The composing stick set down. The lead type redistributed to its cells. The afternoon's ache retreating as the muscles release. Let it come. The sleep that comes to bodies that have worked. That comes through walls and up stairwells and over courtyard rooftops regardless of anything else. Tomorrow there'll be more text to set. More letters, each one a gram, each one a syllable of some sentence that matters to someone and will matter to someone less than you expect. More soup at 15 centimes, more Bertrand, more Arnaud with his borrowing of composing sticks, more Fernand with his blue-green hands nodding in the corridor. More of this city, disclosing itself. But that's tomorrow. Right now. The building in June, warm and breathing, the sky above the courtyard actually dark tonight. A real dark. The June dark that is still more night than grey. Stars, possibly, through the skylight. The first stars you've seen from this room since you arrived. You are Lucien Moreau. You came here with 40 francs and a letter and a certainty that dissolved. You have a key on a shelf. You have 3 letters from your mother. You have a trade that makes things out of metal that become ideas in people's heads. You have a building that knows you, in its way, the way buildings know the people they hold, by their weight on the stairs, their hour at the pump, their light in the window. That's enough. That's exactly enough. Let the sounds go. Let the building go on without your attention for a while. Let Paris go about its business in the June dark, its gas lamps and its river, and its iron tower rising in the southwest above the sleeping rooftops. 300 metres of something nobody asked for that will outlast everyone who objected to it. Everyone who lived in the rooms behind the rooms that face the boulevards. Everyone who paid 12 francs a month for proximity and received intimacy in exchange. The walls are thin. The walls were always thin. Everyone knew. No one said, let it go. Let sleep come through the walls the way everything else comes through the walls. Unstoppable, continuous, indifferent to what you'd prefer. Centuries will pass. This building will stand longer than you know what to do with. The walls that are too thin for privacy will be too substantial to remove without someone's permission, and that permission will be unlikely, and the rooms will keep receiving their tenants, generation by generation, the pump replaced by pipes that go directly to taps, the taps replaced by better taps, the stove replaced by something centrally heated, the zinc roof replaced and replaced again, the walls repainted in colours that cover the colours that covered the water stains from 1888. But the walls will still be walls, and people will still lie against them at night and hear the next life coming through. And the city will go on making its particular demand, which is this: come here and be small within something enormous. Bring your trade and your 40 francs and your letters and your certainty. Offer them to the city's machinery, and the city will take what it needs and return you to yourself slightly altered, slightly knowing, slightly able to hold the beautiful and the terrible simultaneously, which is the only way to hold Paris, which is the only way to hold most things that are worth holding. The cough from above is gone. There's a new sound from above. The Bellevues breathing in their sleep. Something continues. Something always continues. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. The key is on the shelf. Take the rest. Good night.